It's the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert. The debates and controversies around President Trump's immigration policy has become one of the country's predominant issues. On the one side, we have the Republicans and Fox News supporting Trump's family separation policy, the indefinite detention of immigrant families, and now possibly the denial of due process rights for immigrants. On the other hand, we have the Democrats and liberal news outlets presenting the Trump administration's inhumanity with regard to these policies. A recent article in the Columbia Journalism Review, however, titled "Politics Pushes Central American Voices Out of Child Separation Coverage," argues that what most media outlets are missing is not only the voices of immigrants and longtime immigration experts, but also lack a historical perspective on the immigration debate. Joining me now is the article's author, Roberto Lovato. Roberto is a writer working out of the San Francisco Writers' Grotto and has either worked on or reported on Central American refugee issues for almost 30 years. Thanks for joining us today, Roberto.
Glad to be with you, Greg.
So let's start with what the media coverage of the Trump administration's policies, immigration policies, has been like and how it has evolved. In your article, you suggest that there was a transition at some point from being relatively uncritical to being far more critical. What was this transition about?
Well, you have to the transition from being not critical of the president to being critical takes place from not just the last 2 weeks, but from the last 10 years, from the Obama era to the Trump era, where I've spoken to people who were detained this last week, people that were not detained, they were in prison. They don't even use the word detained. And people like a woman I interviewed named Ana Luna, whose name I had to change because she wanted me to. Ana told me that she noticed how suddenly, quote, they're critical of the president, unquote, when they weren't, meaning they, the media. So there's a night and day treatment in terms of how President Obama was treated in separating and jailing children and their mothers, to Donald Trump's separating and jailing children and their mothers. I mean, the reporting would have us believe that Donald Trump's actions take place, kind of Deus ex machina, the God in the machine comes out from on high and suddenly comes down on us, Hitler blitzkrieg-like, and oh my God, people start crying oceans of tears. When, in fact, among Central Americans, like Ana, or like the advocates and scholars that are covering this issue for more than a decade, 20 years, even 30 years among some of us, there's been a lot of tears and oceans of tears as well. But somehow, the part that cried because of what the Democrats and Obama did to these imprisoned migrants and children, people put in tents, kids separated from their mothers. About 5,000 children were separated from their mothers and put in foster care, and mothers and fathers, and put in foster care by the Obama administration in 2011 alone. This, according to an important study by Seth Fried Wexler when he was at Race Forward. So we see a disparity in the coverage when there's a similarity, a similarity in the treatment. A similarity that's not even made, right? They put like a wall between what Trump is doing as something utterly new and what Obama did, which is somehow a gentler, kinder form of, say, shrinking children's brains when they're in these immigrant prisons, as their psychologist told me happens after 6 weeks, or as if the trauma of a mother like Ana, separated by the Obama administration, or imprisoned by the Obama administration, exposed to conditions that drove some children and migrants to attempt suicide, to slit their wrists, to try to hang themselves, as if all that is kind of gentler and kinder than what Donald Trump is doing. It's astonishing, really, the layers of dehumanization and the different kinds of dehumanization.
So considering that now that there's a lot more outrage and intensity in coverage, Wouldn't you say this is a good thing? I mean, for example, Time Magazine. I mean, of course, what's missing is this earlier coverage. But I'm saying, isn't it something positive to consider that now there's much more, that there is at least a focus on it? For example, when Time Magazine juxtaposed a crying Honduran immigrant a child, a toddler, basically, with a towering figure of Donald Trump, who was saying, "Welcome to America." What's your response to the use of this kind of imagery and this kind of coverage?
Well, I think there is some good to be had in the fact that a story that's more than 10 years old of child separation, Central American child separation, and the jailing of Central American children and mothers is now coming out. What Central American scholars and Central American activists and Central American community have known in the Obama era. Now everybody's getting to know in the Trump era. The problem is, again, that it's being narrated as if this didn't happen in the Obama era, and that's, I think, very dangerous in terms of, say, the way that Time Magazine cover story that you mentioned, where they have a Trump standing over a child. They literally cut and paste the image of a crying girl who was not separated from her mother and put it on the cover next to Trump. So that's almost metaphoric of the way that I think liberal media and I think liberal progressive organizations are cutting and pasting and objectifying Central American identity, Central American pain in what one scholar called violence porn. To use for political ends. So there's an objectification of migrants by the reactionaries, and there's an objectification of the Central American children and mothers by liberals and progressives, where basically the image of Central Americans that prevails, because you don't have any Central American voices except the crying voice, the crying voice of a mother, the crying voice of a child. So Central Americans in the narrative have been reduced to images and sounds and sound bites of pain. We don't, because my family's from El Salvador. Truth, disclosure, full disclosure. We don't appear as fighters. I mean, in El Salvador, something on the order of 1/3 of all Salvadorans were organized against the state during the war, according to the Central American University. I mean, you have people that have a ferocious will to fight, as any labor union in the United States will tell you. You wouldn't know it from the way the media coverage of Central American child separation is being told. It's being told primarily through the lens of a liberal, progressive media that is protecting Barack Obama at all costs from the heat of this major, intense issue that stirs a lot of emotion. So it's no coincidence that it seems that the expertise among Democratic Party operatives and ex-Obama officials is greater than that of Central Americans, because they appear exponentially more than Central Americans do. In fact, Central Americans don't appear in a single, not one, ni un artículo about the Central American child separation story of the last few weeks. This raises the question: what are people actually crying about, right? Because that image is not backed up. Those sounds aren't backed up by context, by storytelling from people who are more complex than just crying and suffering. That story is not backed up by scholars who spent their lifetimes analyzing and studying this. That story is being backed up by Democratic Party operatives, liberal media, who basically cut and paste images and sounds of Central American suffering and pain and put it up for mass consumption in order to beat up Donald Trump and cover for Barack Obama.
Well, actually, speaking of the covering for Barack Obama and the lack of historical context, I mean, what would you say are the consequences of leaving that type of historical context out of the picture? I mean, is it that Obama's policies directly contributed to an intensification, perhaps, of the Trump administration's policies, or would you say that they're basically the same?
Well, as far as separating children, Barack Obama separated children from their mothers. As far as putting children in tents, Barack Obama put children in tents. He separated thousands of children from their mothers. 2011 alone, more than 5,100 children were separated from their mothers and fathers and put in foster care. Again, that's according to Race Forward. You can look at a story by McClatchy that basically confirms this as well. So when you don't report that and you put it all on Donald Trump, you basically don't really want to look at the policy foundation for this truly terrifying action by Donald Trump and those of Barack Obama. Because when I interview Ana Luna, she's describing to me twitching in the face, women who try to slit their wrists, boys who try to hang themselves, twitching arms involuntarily, all signs of trauma and extreme layers of trauma, according to psychologists I've interviewed. So when you don't have a historical accounting of that, you're basically allowing that to be normalized in the national unconscious of the United States, in the political unconscious of the United States. And so we are all being brought into, by Donald Trump, but also by the Democrats, into normalizing this kind of policy and treatment, because it goes kind of really noticed when an evil bad guy who's, I would say is like the Jungian shadow of the United States, but then covered up by what I would call the denial mechanism that is the Obama administration and the Democratic Party with respect to Central American children and mothers.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there for now. I was speaking to Roberto Lovato, longtime writer on Central American refugee issues and author of the recently published Columbia Journalism Review article, Politics Pushes Central American Voices Out of Child Separation Coverage. Thanks for joining us today, Roberto.
Glad to be with you, Greg.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network. Also, if you like stories such as this one, I want to remind you that we recently started our summer fundraiser and need your help to reach our goal of raising $200,000. Every dollar that you donate will be matched. Unlike practically all other news outlets, we do not accept support from governments or corporations. Please do what you can today.